Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth part of this series. In this episode we are going to be interacting with the actual objects in our inventory. I wanted to make sure that like in Breath of the Wild, we can equip weapons without actually drawing them straight into combat. The important thing I learned from this is that there are some limits to the out-of-the-box inventory solution as well, so it will be fun to work around those limitations in videos to come. Before we start, I would like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for the amazing support. This scene will be made available on Patreon as it gets updated. So we're going to start off with a simple UI element, and I will make the image available in the description as well, but I would highly suggest coming up with your own image, your own look for this, and not just, well, basically ripping Breath of the Wild like I did. I just went into Photoshop and just tried to remake the exact same image. I would not recommend doing that whatsoever. So I will make it available, but I'd suggest just using as a placeholder and nothing else really. So we're back into our default HUD. Now I've noticed that my mini-map will sometimes move around a bit and not really stay in place, so that's definitely something I'll have a look at as well. It's one of those polishing things that we'll need to make sure works well, but for now let's just focus on continuing. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to HUD and I'm going to create a new empty. Let's call this interactor. There we go. And this interactor, I'm just going to draw it down. There we go, seems about right. And this will house several objects. Now, for now, we'll only have the one. This will be to, pick stuff up. So let's rename this to, well, literally pick up. And let's drag in that image. Where are you? There we go. And yeah, I really want to highlight, come up with your own thing, be original, or is it choice? Oh, that's the one. But just highlights a bit that, how we're going to really copy over the look and feel and how you can create something similar. Yeah, seems about right. I'm going to drag this in the middle, and this is one of those things I might completely change at some point, but for now it's, something that works and the behavior will remain the same. I'm not really going to change anything in there. Now the reason I didn't put any symbols here is because you can get creative. So I'm just going to use the keypad numbers for now, but if you go to Fantasy UI, the one that is in the Fantasy bundle from the Play Store, and go here, you will have all of these buttons as well. So the default values, so X, if you're going to go with the controller setup, actually makes a lot more sense. But for now, I'm just going to add the numbers that we actually use on the keypad. There we go. So this will be the 6, and I'm pretty sure that's the right one. Yeah, something like this. There we go. Let's make this a bit bigger. That's maybe a bit too big. And yeah, this color actually seems about right. I'm just going to duplicate these and just drag them over to this one as well. So this would be the 4. And this has to be white, but you know, like semi-transparent, something like that. Pretty sure I typed 4, but that's okay. Seems about aligned. And it should be the 8. Let's duplicate this again. And this is a 5. So there we go. The last thing we need is some text. So let's duplicate the 6 again. Drag it here. And the text should be pickup. Seems about right. Change alignment, make it maybe 24. Yeah, that's a pretty decent one. Just align it a bit too much. There we go. So yeah, cool. Pretty simple. Now the next step I'm going to add is something that can be done in so many different ways. So we're going to make this go slightly bigger and smaller, you know, just like in Breath of the Wild. So it's a similar effect, and you can do this with animations. There's tons of UI assets. I'm going to go with a solution from the action pack, but you definitely do not need to do this. Reason I'm going to use the action pack action for this is because it's the fastest way, and I need the action pack asset anyway, considering that will be used for platforming. So if I already have it, might as well use it if it simplifies life. So let's add a trigger here, and this will be a on enable. There we go. And this is going to have a really simple action, so I'm just going to add it here. Going to scale object by value, so this is from the action pack. Going to drag in the entire pickup folder, and I'm going to turn all of these on. Just 0.1 for everything. Return objects is on as well. Going to leave this on, and we're going to restart actions. And that's it. So we'll just scale a tiny bit, making it slightly bigger or smaller. So yeah, a really simple effect. And yes, this can be done in so many ways. You do not need the action pack for this. But like I said, considering we'll be using it anyway, might as well use it. So that's it for that. Going to turn pickup off, because obviously it won't be enabled by default. And that's step 1. So for now we're going to leave the UI alone. Let's focus on that player. Here you are. And I'm going to add some objects to the scene. So going to go to the polygon asset that was part of that fantasy bundle as well. So I'm going to go into prefabs, and I think it was props, and we're going to drag some stuff in. There we go. So we have a cart. These are some really nice assets, I'm not gonna lie. Really high quality stuff. And considering the price that you pay for them, it's actually relatively cheap as well, compared to a lot of other assets out there that contain a lot of models, or then ask a lot of money for it, or hardly contain any models. and you pay full price, and for some reason these assets just offer a good price and a lot of models as well, so pretty cool. Now going to drag in that sword as well, and that was in the fantasy characters, and we have our sword. And there we go. Now you can get creative and you can make this have physics as well. I'm just going to leave it like this for now. But if you want it to be an object that actually has physics and bounces around, I'd suggest just adding a rigid body and, use gravity. But yeah, I'm fine with this for now. So we're going to be grouping some stuff together. So let's create an empty here just to keep it organized. Let's call this props. I'm going to drag this all of inside, and we're going to create another empty which will be items, and that's where we'll have the sword in. But before we do that, I'm going to create another empty, and let's call this pickup sword. There we go, and I'm going to drag our sword in there. So this will be the parent. Now the parent will have all of the actions, so that's actually going to make things interesting, and there will be quite a lot of actions. So let's make sure the empty is actually aligned. Yeah, that's cool. So I'm going to add a sphere collider here. So let's move that around a bit. There we go. Make it a bit bigger. Maybe 1 will be enough. You have to be pretty close. Let's make it 1.2. Yeah, that's about right. Maybe that's even a bit too much, but we'll give that a go. So we have our sphere collider. It needs to be a trigger, of course, and let's collapse all of these just to give ourselves some space. I'm going to add a trigger, player enter. Another trigger which will be for on player exit. Going to not create a new set because we'll simply duplicate these, just save some time. So let's add these actions, and the first thing will be to actually activate our user interface item, and that is going to be our pickup. There we go. And let's duplicate this, and another thing we need to activate, and I'll explain a bit later why, is this little simple thing called activator. And this is just an empty, and yes, you can do this with bools, but this is faster, so that's why I'm using this. And this will basically make sure that we can only pick up this sword if we're in this collider, and that if we're in this collider, it will only pick up this sword. So yeah, I'll explain a bit better in a bit. And let's make sure the activator is in there. Now next thing we're going to do is we'll duplicate these, and we're literally just going to turn these off in the duplicate. Let's drag those in. Perfect. And then the next step is going to be another trigger, which is going to be key. And I'm going to use on key hold here, simply because this is going to be a personal preference, but I actually prefer having to long press a button to pick something up. I always get annoyed in games when I pick stuff up by simply pressing the button once, and yes, this is definitely a personal preference. So if you don't want that, change the trigger to on key down, and it will be a single press. I prefer holding the button a bit, so it will be a really short amount of time, so 0.5 seconds is not a long time, but it, it forces me to do a bit more, so yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of accidentally picking stuff up, so I'm going to add the conditions here just to keep it a bit clean. So make these, remove them as well. And we'll drag these in. This needs a clause, it needs actions as well, and I'm even going to drag those in here. We don't need any else actions here, so let's even collapse all of those other ones, we don't need them. And these will be the conditions telling us when we can actually pick this up. So this is going to rely on the activator being active, and this is really the reason why we have this empty. Yes, it could be done with a bool, but I'm fine with this. So basically, when we hold this button in this area, we can only pick up this sword. And the reason for that is I don't want to be able to accidentally, teleport, pick up something on a distance because it's using the same mechanic. So it really relies on the activator that belongs to this sword. So yeah, you can do it with a bool. I always prefer just using empties, just matter of personal preference. So we're going to add an item. There we go, item add, and we're going to add the sword. Now we still need to add, actually alter this default sword that is in the inventory. If you don't have sword here, make sure you have the inventory examples installed via the module manager as well. And this is going to deactivate our pickup as well. Little important detail, but once it's gone, we actually want this to be gone. So yeah, need to make sure we do that. And then destroy after finishing, so it will destroy the parent, which will in turn destroy every child of it as well. So the item will be gone from the world, from the scene basically, and that's what we want. So yeah, pretty cool. Let's actually give this a go and see if we missed out on something. So here we have it. As you can see, it's, telling us we can pick it up. It's growing a bit, and yeah, it looks pretty cool. So if we long press 6, it will pick it up, and the pickup is not deactivated, so you need to check that, which is a good thing. Now if I open up my menu with escape, we will see the sword here. Now this will not do the correct behavior from the start because we didn't set that up, so let's make sure we do that as well. But yeah, pretty nice. And let's have a look at what we missed, why it didn't actually pick up our sword or turn off the pickup. And it's because pickup is turned on, not off. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Cool, so that's that for the sword. We can just drag that item in here. And there we go. So we'll be creating a lot more items obviously, and we're going to keep everything a bit organized. So that's why we have props and we have our items folder as well. So just a bit of structure. So that's it for the sword. Obviously we now need to actually set up the correct actions. So we're going to go to preferences and sword. So this is the default sword installed by installing the examples. Let's change the description to something a bit more fun. A sword made of steel. Wow. Let's just call it really basic sword. It's not really better actually, is it? Price 100. Now that is a bit pricey. Let's give it 25. Max tab, stack 1, and weight 5. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Now it is equipment and equipment right hand, which is fine. On click, yes, we don't want to consume this item, it's not a potion, so this is all good. And equip sword on invoker, that's all good as well. Now on equip, I already set this up. Reason for that is because it's really hard to remember all the correct numbers. But on equip, we're actually going to do this. So by default, it attaches it to the right hand, and we're going to change that to spine. And for position, please just copy over these numbers. Now the reason I already added this is because it is a lot of trying out, basically, to find a position that works for the sword. So I was gonna save those 20 minutes of trying to figure out what looks best by just already having these numbers in there. So if you have a different item with a different look, you know, that's completely fine as well. Just make sure you adjust these numbers then. So in the game object, we are adding the prop sword ornate, which is the default one we use for our melee example as well, and that's the one we have in our scene, because that's the one we want to equip. So we'll equip it to our back, our spine, and the reason I chose spine is because we're going to be running around. The sword will actually move along with the spine of the character as well, which just looks nice. So it's the correct bone, in my opinion, to attach it to. So quite important. And then the next step is toggle variable. Now, in order to do this, we need to add a variable. So literally just add a variable. Call it sword. I'm just gonna call it equipped because I don't want an error. Change this to bool and leave it open and change the tag to everything and press save. And that's it. So there we have our sword equipped. And on equip, I'm going to add an action, which is literally called toggle variable bool, and you pick up your global variable sword equipped. So really simple. We're not really actively using it as much right now, but it's something I thought would be useful to already add. So yeah, make sure that's added as well, and make sure it is attached the correct way. And if you are using a different sword model, if you are using a different character model, you might have to alter this a tiny bit, but I think even in that case these numbers will be pretty decent and will already look pretty well. Now on unequip, we are going to remove from spine. So by default it was already removed from right hand. All you need to do is just click spine here and copy over the exact same action that we have here. So just literally copy and press paste. That's it. So yeah, normally I set this up all from scratch, but with these numbers this was just a lot easier to do, really. So cool. Now that we've done that, it will actually attach it to our back, which is great, but we want to make sure it is only visible when we're not actively drawing our sword, and when we're sheathing we want to make sure we put it back as well. So we need to perform a couple of extra steps in order to make sure it works, and I'm going to show you what it looks like right now. Cool, so right now I can press E just like before. We have our sword equipped, and if I pick this up, our image is gone, which is good. open up my inventory, I equip it, and it will be nicely equipped. It looks really good. But yeah, it doesn't really have any impact. It's just a visual thing, and that's pretty much it. So it doesn't really matter if it's equipped or not. Now, as you can see, because it's attached to the spine and we walk, it actually moves along pretty nicely. So yeah, pretty happy with that result. A lot of space between the character and the sword either, so actually looks pretty decent. Now we want to make sure that equipping this actually gives you the impression that this is needed in order to use the sword. We want to set the mechanic up. So there's a couple of things we need to do for that, obviously, and those are all based on the player equipping conditions. So we already set that up before, but now we need to make some slight adjustments. So if we go to equip, we have this trigger saying it will open up the sword with E, and then we have these conditions. And these conditions are the ones we will need to change. So let's add our first clause, second clause really, and we're going to actually turn this around. So is armed is actually going to be is unarmed. And we are going to add has equipped, and let's make sure that's the right one. So equipment, let's go to inventory, and now has equipped is right. Sorry, it needs to be item. Completely was looking in the wrong place, and the item is sword. So yeah, that's what we want to happen. Now these need to be turned around, which is completely fine because they're just two groups of actions. So we're going to grab the one below and we're going to drag it in. So we're literally turning it around. I don't know why I did this because we'll change this as well. So the sword is still fine. So we have our main sword, which is nice. And we're going to add a new action, and need to look where this was located. Character attachment, there we go. So player, and then it's going to be detach or remove actually, and bone spine, and that's because the sword is on our spine. So the moment we're equipping it, we're also removing it from the spine of the player, which is what we want. And then we have these actions here, and well, unfortunately I actually need to create something new, so I'm going to remove this one, and we're going to add a call conditions, which means we need to set up some new conditions. So let's do right click, game creator, conditions, there we go. And these conditions have, well, pretty much the exact same condition really. So is it equipped? So let's go back to here. There we go. Needs an action as well. And we're going to sheath weapon. That's still going to be the same. And then we are also going to simply copy this one over, paste it in, and we're going to do attach spine. And now we need those numbers again. So let's actually just open up our preferences and let's check those numbers. So -60, 20. Pretty sure I can actually just copy this over. I'm not sure why I didn't think of that. There we go, that's better. And it's back on our back. Now the reason we need an additional condition for this is because otherwise we could just press E twice and it would magically make this sword appear on our back. So we need to make sure that even when we sheath our weapon and it's going to put the sword back, it only happens if we have this item equipped. So equipping the item in the inventory is literally just a toggle and a visual element. That's all. And the rest is done with the melee module, which doesn't actually need the inventory module at all, but it is obviously really cool to have it like this. So that's it for these actions. So let's make sure this all works. Perfect. So we can walk around. Now I'm going to press E, and as you can see, nothing happens. So if I press E, nothing happens at all. So we're not drawing a sword, no magical sword appears on our back. That's all perfect. Now we're going to pick up our sword, open up our inventory. We see our sword, we're going to click it so it attaches it. We're back in our scene and we have this cool sword on the back. Press E, we use it, press E again, and nothing happens. So let's see why that didn't go well. Now, one more thing, as you can see, there obviously is no fancy drawing animation of that sort. We are going to cover animations in a separate video for the melee module because there's a lot we can do with this, but the effect of having him draw the weapon really relies on a really simple animation. So that's something we'll set up later. Now let's have a look at why this didn't actually work, and I'm pretty sure I just forgot to drag in those conditions, and yes, that's what I did. Cool. So I forgot to drag in the conditions on else when we press our button. So yeah, basic mistake, but it happens. Now the next thing we're going to do is related to our toolbar. Now I said this before, but right now the toolbar, which is this this little sword here, is just a visual element. It's nothing else, it's just visual, and it's, you know, it looks nice, but that's it really. So we need to make sure this sword is actually something that we use. So I'm going to turn that off right now, and basically all will be done by the toolbar as well. And there might be different ways of, you know, handling this. In my experience, I found that some triggers just didn't do what I expected them to do. So I'm using a workaround, and maybe it's not even workaround, maybe it really is how it's supposed to be. But yeah, there are triggers for variable changes, triggers for equipment changes, and they don't really seem to run in the background for me, and maybe I'm just doing something wrong, but this works, and maybe this was always the way it was supposed to be. So let's see. So we add an action called conditions, and we're going to restart that action as well. This is just to make sure it always runs. We're going to create some conditions here. Game creator conditions, there we go. This is going to be in our toolbar, by the way, and just to make sure I don't make the same mistake as last time, dragging it in straight away. And these conditions are really simple. These rely on our bool. So variables, variable bool. This is the sword equipped I mentioned before. If this is true, then what is going to happen? And it is literally just going to activate our sword icon, which is this one. Copy this one, create new actions, and else it's going to deactivate it. So on unequip, it will set the bool to, well, no or false. And because this is running constantly, it will then deactivate the sword in the equipment toolbar UI design element, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, really simple thing. And I know for everyone thinking, hey, isn't there a variable change bool for that? Variables on variable change. There is, but for me it's not working, and might be related because I'm not on Game Creator 1.19, which is because I'm still using 2019.3.9 I think for this, and that's because of the current issue with behavior on 2019.4. And until that's completely fixed, I'm just staying with this version. There's a a workaround as well to make behavior work again in the LTS version, and that's working fine for my own private project, but just want to keep this tutorial project as it is without upgrading until I'm sure everything is working as should. So maybe that's fixed in 2019 and you don't need to recall this in 1.19, but yeah, this is the way I work around it and it's working perfectly fine. On start, actually checking something is something I use all the time anyway, so just wanted to see this time if it could be done in a different way. So if I'm correct, we have everything set up, so let's hit play and see if this all works. Cool. Now I do notice this little warning, player equipment component was not found, considering adding one in the editor. So yeah, make sure you do that. It's Game Creator actually fixes this error, which is why I'm not facing any issues here. So it just temporarily adds one. But if you want to avoid a warning on the player, just add component, which is player equipment, which is needed for the inventory module. So this fixes that error. If you don't have this, Game Creator is smart enough to actually automatically add it in play mode so that you won't run into any bugs, which is really cool, but you should actually avoid trying to have any issues anyway. So let's continue. Let's actually see if this all works. So as you can see in our UI, there's no little sword anymore. I'm going to pick this up, I'm going to go to our inventory, and in order for this to look a lot more like Zelda, we would need some descriptions here, which is something that will require a bit more work, as it's not a out-of-the-box thing that would just work straight away. So we'll definitely add that a bit later on, but those are one of those finer details thing that just require a bit more work. So definitely doing that though. So we're equipping our sword, going back to our game. We have the little sword icon now here as well. I'm going to press E and we have our sword equipped. Looks really cool. All works obviously. And then we press E again and the sword goes back on our back. So yeah, pretty cool. So a lot of steps to actually make this happen, but that's because we need to make sure we're using both the inventory module and the melee module, and a lot of this is just visual effects really. The sword on our back doesn't add any real value whatsoever, but it looks so much better. So yeah, that's it for this video. In the next one I'm actually going to mess with terrain, which might be a bit early, but I notice every time I record the start of what the end result will look like, my own little scene looks so much better with just 5 minutes of effort with terrain. So we're going to address that in the next video, just to make our environment look a lot more pleasing to the eye. So hope you enjoyed this. If you do, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.